Everything is fine.
So my name is Birtalan Ágnes, and I am the head of the Department of Mongolian Indonesian Studies at ELTE University. And I'm going to talk, I'm sorry, I hope to move my slides. It was so, okay, it has moved already, yeah. So I'm sorry, I have a message, your internet connection is unstable. So I'm sorry if I have to leave the platform, so I will try to come back thereafter.
No,
So,
for the moment, I think it's a perfect
okay,
connection.
yeah, so just I get some messages from
you
my,
can continue, yes, you can continue.
my computer. Okay, so I will go not into the detail, just to mention a few words about the project. My talk is connected to the sources and a very brief historical survey whether the heroes of my legends are Mongols or Tatars, and I will outline some points of my hypothesis and a little bit in more detail, depending on the time as well. I offer a typology of the text corpus. So some notes about the project. I'm a Mongolist, and the main aim of this project is to translate this text corpus into Mongolian and Chinese, to make the Mongolian and Chinese Mongolian and also Chinese audience acquainted with the items belonging to this text corpus. And also, of course, prepare analysis of narrative motifs in the context of folklore studies. The cooperation is carried out in the frame with a cooperation of Chinese Mongolists of the Academy of Social Sciences in Beijing, and the project leader is Sarina, who was a former visiting researcher at our department. And the expected results, as I have mentioned, the text corp audience. Some words about my sources. Of course, in order to create historical context, I need Rogerius Carmen Miserabile, and from the really abundant text issues, publications concerning the legends, folk legends, I here mentioned only 3 ones. One is that belongs to the former Yugoslavia, that testifies that these legends belong to the living tradition in the whole Carpathian Basin. And there's a brand new publication issued in 2018 by Magyar Zoltán, the Catalogue of Hungarian Historical Legends, 12 bulky volumes, and the 4th of it, some others as well, deal with the Mongolian and Tatar stuff. And Tatar Saroltas records are particularly interesting because she collected the materials during the first decade of the 21st century in Transylvania. This, the manuscript, the English version of her article, you can catch on the academia.edu. And of course, I use internet data. It is interesting that many travel agencies put some versions of legends on their websites. From the numerous studies, I'd like to mention 2. One is Johannes Zsizov, a program of terror and cruelty, and Bésa Bojános, the history of an enemy image, which I used to create my research paradigm. Of course, you know very well Carmen Miserabile, and here I'd love to show you the new Mongolian translation's title, Kashodlin Do or Kashodlin Dolal, and I hope that it will be accessible soon or in the nearest future. So only a few words about the encounters with the Mongols and Tatars. So why Mongol and why Tatar? How did Hungarians have information about the Mongols? The first, of course, well known that F4 Batus invasion, Julianus letters. And can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I constantly have messages from the internet.
It's okay for the moment.
Something
it's okay.
is wrong. Okay.
You
okay.
can continue. Yes.
Okay, so please let me type if something goes wrong on your platforms as well.
All right.
So, it was an indirect information or indirect pieces of information. And direct information are from the 1241-42. Of course, we heard from Alexander about the Second Mongolian offensive. I'm not going into the details. But what is important, these are the repeated Tatar invasions initiated by the Crimean Khanate, and some of my legends belong definitely to this period from 16th to 18th century. Concerning my hypothesis, so in the present talk, I introduce little known or less known text corpus about the Mongolian expansion, the orally transmitted folk legends, and the records were made during the last century, and some early records exist in the 19th century as well. So my approach to these legends have not only preserved these legends have not only preserved the heroic resistance of Hungarian villagers against the Mongols, the military movements, and the sad lamentation about the loss and the devastation, but they also deal with some evidence from a long distance of time on an important aspect of the 13th century Mongols military propaganda tactic, that is psychological threat with rumors. About this, see Johannes Zsizov's theory. A few words about the genre. In Hungarian Népmonda, I use folk legend in English, and this is a well-known for all of you, the genre of everyone, so the storytellers can add or change the motifs, and what is important are the sources of this corpus. The oral tradition transmitted from and passed from several centuries ago, and the pieces of evidence of written sources that penetrated into the oral transmission. And an interesting part of the sources are the public education, so historical classes on history also had, and according to my understanding, an influence on the text, and of course the fantasy of the storytellers. One more important point, that these stories are many times legitimized by naming someone from that area, some honored person or ancestors of the storyteller. And now I love to introduce to you the classification of the main motifs in this text corpus. And here I'd like to ask you, dear colleagues, if you have similar motifs or text issues in your countries, in whatever language. So I would be very much appreciate if you could provide parallel materials. So the first group of main motifs reflect the heroic resistance. There will be some very well-known motifs from Rogerius' Carmen Miserabila as well. So You can see on my slide, I just highlight some of them. So hiding in swampland and imitating crowd of soldiers as tactic of the local villagers and tricking in several ways and trying to damage the Tatars' horses. An interesting motive is the baking a huge loaf of bread or milk bread and putting on the walls of a castle or a temple where the locals hide themselves, which demonstrate that, okay, we are in abundance of food, and it usually ends that the Tatars leave that village. The heroic leaders, one of the villagers, in many occasions, a woman, and sometimes a shamaness, which is my main topic of studies, or a woman with supernatural power or witchcraft, as you would love to name it. She is the leader of this resistance against the Mongols. As I study the current topics, so I'd love to share with you some contemporary echoes of this resistance. For example, you will find at the end of my presentation the sources of the pictures. So how it is depicted in Transylvania, in Nyárad, Magyaros, where the heroic warrior woman's legend is still living motive. Classification number 2, this is connected to the mythology as well, the Tatars' characteristics about their cruelty and tactics. The morphology of the enemy, so they are dog-headed and they are ugly, they speak a language no one can understand and so on. And concerning the cruelty, especially the brutal behavior against the women are emphasized in these legends. So despite that we see that sometimes the leader of the resistance is a woman. Of course, such mythological motifs as anthropophagy, cannibalism appears in these plots as well. And there is a very interesting story. I wonder whether you have parallel materials in other countries concerning this. That it means that the Tatars have a very clever tactic. They call the local persons naming by very usual names. Kati Panni gyertek elő, Kati Panni come out. The Tatars have left, sometimes putting on Hungarian clothes as well. So, and this way trick the villagers. The number 6, point number 6, it is well known from the sources that the Mongols stole the king's seal. And I think this is a very late motive, and this reflects the school education in this legend. Of course, we also have some contemporary depictions from Transylvania, for example, of the cruelty and brutal behavior against women. The name of the village is also interesting. Veszélymező means danger field. The classification group number 3, which is very interesting, and I suppose that many of you have similar in your countries or in your areas, the toponyms. Natural or man-made geographical formations are named after the Tatars. So, such as in Hungarian, Testhalom, Őrhalom, Tatárvágat, and so many others. So heap erected from human bodies, heap of watch, tree of watch, and Tatar gorge, depending on the natural phenomena of that particular reason. For example, from Western Hungary, Őrhalom, heap of watch, and the very usual, and in many regions where Hungarians live, there are Tatar halls, Tatarjuk in Hungarian, the hiding places of local villagers. And this is still the part of the living tradition. And my last group of motifs is the afterlife of the Tatar expansion. And I suppose, and in all probability, the most of the items belonging to this text corpus, these plots, preserve the memory about the later Tatar invasions, 16th, 18th century. So the main motifs are that the Tatars stay or remain in that particular village, and in the time of the recording of the legend, some of the families claim to be their descendants. A captive returns from the Tatar land, and a very interesting topic, which concerns also my mythological studies, the ghost of the killed Tatar that stays in the surrounding. He hid his stolen treasures. This is treasure keeper Tatar, the ghost, a soul transformation, which is an interesting shamanic phenomenon. And my conclusion on the above enumerated motifs, the presence of the historical memory of the 13th century Mongolian invasion can be verified according to my understanding as follows. The morphology of the enemy that is displayed in accordance with the Mongols' war propaganda that has circulated in that time written sources and also in oral tradition according to my understanding. First of all, to cause fear, I mean the Mongolian war propaganda, by spreading such mythical and real motifs as the dog-headed Tatar, the information about the cannibalism of the Mongols, and being especially brutal towards women and children. Johannes Zizov, in his detailed article I have mentioned at the beginning of my talk about the Mongols' war propaganda, quotes a great number of 13th century written sources recorded by eyewitnesses, and stereotypic hyperbolic mythologies ascribed to several nomadic people appearing on the horizons of Europe. And according to my understanding, these have survived. At least we can trace them in the oral tradition of Hungarians, which is even now living heritage. Sources of my photos, if some of you are interested in, and thank you for your kind attention. And I try to close my presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor Birtalan. It was really very interesting and fascinating. And now we have some time, not a lot, I'm afraid, for discussion. So please, if you have questions to our speakers, don't hesitate to post them.